you want, close your eyes and take several deep breaths right into your heart, through your mouth, all the way to the bottom of your lungs, and then just exhale gently. And as you inhale and exhale, see if you can relax your shoulders and find your heart. Take a couple more breaths. And just feel your feet planted on the floor and find your connection to yourself and your open heart. As we walk through our beautiful city during these long summer days, please let us taste the heirloom tomatoes and basil and smile at the breathtaking blankets of pink and orange and red bougainvillea, and hear the hawking and yelling and screeching of parrots as they gather to socialize in the early evenings. Help us feel the grounded pull of the earth beneath our feet, and help us maintain our composure even during stressful situations. Miscommunication with loved ones, not having enough money to pay rent, stuck in bumper-to-bumper traffic, late for an appointment. Let us breathe and maintain our perspective, a broader vision of the big picture and our faith in the world, even as our fragmented daily events come before us. Mistreatment of immigrants, another police shooting, and our government's anti-climate policies. Please help us be present and compassionate to the seemingly million emails, calls, texts, and challenging demands coming at us. To respond joyfully, maintain equanimity, and hope that everything is happening as it's supposed to for the greatest good of all. As we walk, ride, and drive through the landscape of our blessed city, let us respect and uphold the humanity of all beings. The beggar beside the freeway off-ramp, the men and women locked up at Men's Central and Linwood jails, and thousands of victims who have lost a loved one to unimaginable and unexplainable violence. Let us continue to demand fairness and justice and stand together for peace and love. As we sit together in church today, let us notice that we are not alone, that we share common values and the power of our love, connection, and unity to help us survive and persevere on even the saddest days. To know that membership in this church will always be here to remind us that this is a safe community where judgment and criticism fall away and love and humor prevail. Amen. So when you're ready, just wiggle your fingers and toes. Come on back to the room if you had your eyes closed. Take another breath. That's it. This isn't a light sermon, just giving you a heads up. But I'm going to support you and help you through it. And I want to mention, I'm proud to be back in Canoga Park, where I grew up. And I'm really glad to see that Follow Your Heart health food store is still around the corner, and other landmarks from my childhood. This sermon is dedicated to Faith of Agen, who's the patroness of prisoners. And to my father, Larry Mason, who is a former Los Angeles Deputy District Attorney and Inglewood judge, who taught me to appreciate both the defense and the prosecutorial points of view and maintain a sense of humor. I ran into a lot of traffic on my way home from the Victim Offender Dialogue training in San Diego. I was thinking about restorative justice. As I drove, I listened to a TED Talk by Alain de Botton on success. It got me thinking how we measure achievement in our society. I serve as an alternate sentencing mitigation expert on murder cases, as you've already heard about. Most of these cases are capital, and by conducting an exhaustive, comprehensive, psychosocial life history, I help defense attorneys tell empathetic narratives to juries in hopes that they will sentence our clients to life without possibility of parole. It's called LWOP, and not the death penalty. In our business, success means avoiding a trial and getting the client to plead guilty, usually if we absolutely know they're guilty, in exchange for dropping the death penalty. LWOP usually means incarceration at a level 4 maximum security prison in California, like Pelican Bay or Folsom, like our song sung about. And it's usually for at least 15 years. At a level 4, the inmate is often kept in a tiny closet-sized cell with a cellmate on lockdown for 23 hours a day. Occasionally, they have good behavior. They're allowed opportunities for employment, but in most cases, freedoms are limited to 1 hour per day outside the cell for recreation and showers. And in rare cases, prisoners work their way down to level 3 status for more opportunities. Currently, I'm doing a lot of cases for juveniles who were sentenced to life without parole, and who are now have the opportunity to be reevaluated and perhaps get a lesser, more determinate sentence. But that'll be for another sermon. Some of the inmates that get sentenced to life without parole opt for the special needs yard. And they're usually gang dropouts or child molesters or informants who cooperate with authorities. And snitches are universally despised in jails and prisons. Punishment for these violations includes beatings with socks full of batteries or soap, sodomy, and for serious infractions, murder. I have a fair amount of cases involving killing of one's cellmate, etc. Those to be killed are usually killed by stabbing with a prison-made knife or shank. They're called green-lighted. If the individual has personally offended the prison gang, which are segregated by race, you might have heard of the Mexican Mafia, the Black Guerrilla Family, the Aryan Brotherhood. They say a hard candy green light is circulated, and this is a reference to a keistered shank that looks like a chocolate candy bar when removed from its anal hiding place. This is my client's prison world. Take a breath. One of the ways de Botton says we measure success in a society is by judgment of job and financial status. People are characterized as winners and losers. This week, I met with the head honchos of the Los Angeles Public Defender's Office for a strategy session on how to talk the district attorney's office out of seeking the death penalty. Our client is responsible for killing 3 people and wounding 2 in front of a young teenager. As we reviewed our client's life story, the PD brass referred to the client's fathers and stepfathers as lowlifes, losers, and deadbeats. Unable to maintain employment, these role models leached off the system and our client's mother. Sadly, Mrs. H chose a series of violent, nasty lowlifes over our client. This is the mitigation narrative. How negative male role models, poverty, genetics, cognitive impairments, mental illness, emotional and physical abuse and neglect influences our clients to join gangs, sell drugs, rob, steal, and ultimately commit murder. In his TED Talk, de Botton noted that in England, during the Middle Ages, there was compassion for people who failed to attain success and status. They were known as unfortunates. We, on the other hand, classify, belittle, and criticize. Individuals who fail to maintain employment, healthy relationships, independence, and self-support, even those from our families and neighborhoods, are seen as losers. And our current administration and Republican Congress perpetuates these stereotypes. Trump glorifies bullying. As a mitigation expert, it is troubling to be part of an industry that considers life without the possibility of parole successful, especially when the defendant is a poor teenager lacking education and encouragement by loving parents. By no fault of their own, these 14-year-olds in young men bodies are products of their genetics, neighborhoods, and parents' mental illness, drug, and alcohol problems. Many are exposed to violence in utero. With little or no conflict resolution coping skills, other than survival by any means necessary, how do we expect sound decision-making, judgment, impulse control, and appropriate management of volcanic emotions when triggered? How can I make a living off such a system? Breathe. We need radical changes in our criminal justice system, like integration of restorative justice concepts to allow meaningful participation of victims, defendants, and other stakeholders, to promote justice and healing for the entire community, not just focus on trial and sentencing. We must update our jails and prisons to reflect the latest research on prison education, like the documentary First Degree by Roger Weisberg, which puts a human face on prison college programs that prevents inmates from returning to prison. We know isolation exacerbates mental illness and violence, and yet we continue to lock up prisoners in maximum security institutions like Pelican Bay in California and the Supermax in Florence, Colorado. I told you it wasn't going to be that light. Let us look at Norway. Norway's example in 2011. After it suffered its worst massacre ever, Anders Breivik murdered 69 people attending a Labour Party summer camp, you might remember. Breivik was sentenced to 10 to 21 years and will likely be in prison for life. We can learn a lot from the way the Norwegian community handled this case and the global response. The Canadian Globe and Mail noted the popular myth that mental illness equals violence and violence equals mental illness. This is not true. Studies showed that victims of schizophrenia and psychosis are no more likely to be violent than the general public, but they're 10 times more likely to be victims of violence. Violence perpetuated by the mentally ill is usually due to lack of treatment that spirals into psychosis. In some cases, treatment is impossible because the sick person denies they're ill, a condition known as anosognosia. I'm going to try to say it again. Anosognosia. This is a word that's tough for me. But it mainly means that you don't know that you have a sickness, and therefore it's pretty hard to get you into treatment. If you have spent any time on the streets of Los Angeles, you are familiar with untreated mental illness. Though it does not necessarily lead to violence, even people in treatment are unpredictable, as we saw in Aurora, Colorado. We are responsible for our unfortunates. We're responsible for the unfortunates in our community, making sure that they get the care and compassion that they deserve, in line with our first Unitarian principle to recognize the inherent worth and dignity of every person. Next time you hear about another horrible murder, like the Fort Hood shooting that killed 4 and injured 14, or the Boston Marathon bombing that killed 3 and wounded 264 at least, consider whose son committed this atrocity. How we as a community supported or abandoned him. Did we address his emotional needs to the best of our ability, especially if he moved around a lot, constantly because his mother was homeless or on drugs? Did he receive special education services to help with cognitive disabilities or attention problems? What mental illness or trauma went untreated? Or perhaps he refused treatment. Ultimately, crises should bring us together to grieve, heal, and consider what we can do differently to change our approach to how we care for our unfortunates. No one is supposed to be higher or lower or better than or less. We are all human. Even our children we allow to be raised to become violent criminals. Sometimes, instead of a mitigation expert, I am hired as a victim outreach liaison to address the needs and concerns of family members who have lost a loved one to murder and violence in the spirit of restorative justice. As mentioned above, restorative justice focuses on the needs of the victim, offenders, and the community, not relying solely on the flawed criminal justice system. Victims take an active role in the process, while offenders are encouraged to take responsibility for their actions, to repair the harm they've done by apologizing, returning stolen money, or meaningful community service. It is based on the theory of justice that considers crime and wrongdoing an offense against an individual or community rather than the state. Restorative justice fosters dialogue between victims and offenders and shows the highest rate of victim satisfaction and offender accountability, says Wikipedia. Hence the reason I was attending that victim offender training in San Diego. In my 8 years of practicing victim outreach, the most extraordinary example of the power of victim-offender dialogue occurred on a case in El Reno, Oklahoma, in which the family members agreed to forego trial and the death penalty. In exchange, the defendant was sentenced to 5 life sentences and no appeal options for killing 4 children and their mother. The family members met with the defendant in a private room and were allowed to just express their pain and loss and anger and to grieve. They were able to tell him how killing their children and grandchildren destroyed their lives. He broke down and apologized. One of the grandmothers forgave him. A shooting survivor of the Norway massacre had a similar response. He told the Associated Press, "I don't want to hurt him because I have a problem with violence, now more than ever. I want to explain to him what kind of egomaniac mass murderer he is and how he has affected so many people so terribly." Recently, I worked with the surviving family members on a murder case that involved an amazing grandmother, similar to the one previously mentioned, whose daughter and 3 grandchildren, were murdered by a mentally ill defendant who then burned down their house. The criminal justice system prolonged M's agony by changing lawyers, going back and forth about the defendant's mental illness, and pushing its agenda without addressing M's need for healing and closure. M was happy to forego trial and a potential death sentence for the killer if he agreed to plead guilty, give up his appeal rights, and accept 4 life sentences. M was indignant that after 4 years of suffering, the district attorney never mentioned the settlement option. She believes the DA wanted the death penalty and the notoriety and media frenzy that surrounded the trial. Murder and mental illness affects everyone. Consider Devon Hall. It's in the paper this morning. A former NFL football player from Cleveland High School, accused of killing his mother, Alicia Benson. Devon's mental illness was well documented on social media, observed by friends and family, yet went untreated. Here are some ways that you can support nonviolence in our culture to go beyond the criminal justice system to make a human connection. Volunteer for at-risk youth, a mental health clinic, or the jails downtown, Twin Towers, Men's Central Jail, considered the largest mental health institution in the country. Reach out to someone who has lost a loved one or been victimized by violence. Be an empathetic listener and a non-judgmental presence as they tell their story, just like we learned in the Children's Hour. Be a witness to their anger and grief. Do not tell them that you know what their experience is like or that it will be okay. Just share your grounded presence and listen. Bring flowers or food or nonverbal offerings of kindness. Check yourself and your reactions next time you hear about a shooting on the news, and consider the media slant on the story. Even if it's John Oliver or Trevor Noah, imagine what they are not saying and the bigger story behind the sensationalism. Write a letter to your city council person and mayor supporting community mental health services. At First Unitarian Church of Los Angeles, we built a low-income housing building next door to our church. Half the units are set aside for people with mental disabilities. Tell your senators and congressional representatives to fund children's services, especially programs from birth to 5. Doesn't it make sense to proactively support children at the beginning of their lives rather than after they become adults and commit crimes? Pressure Congress to maintain health care and our social safety net. Don't let them turn their backs on the unfortunate in our communities. Perhaps most importantly, nurture and take good care of yourself. Even on the most difficult days, maintain your sense of humor, faith in humanity, hope, and vision for our community. We are counting on you.